Components are at the heart of all Angular applications. That's why Angular is called a component-based framework. A component contains all the business logic, so you can think of it as the controller in the MVC paradigm. It controls a patch of screen called a view, which is a template. And so in this video, we're going to explore the Angular component class and the metadata. Also, we're going to create a simple component using the Angular CLI and see how this component is being imported or exported into the application. But first, let's take a look at the basic component example here. So a component is used by Angular in this fashion. You have a @ symbol followed by the word component. This is called a decorator. It decorates the class right below it. The immediately class below that is the component class. And this class contains some properties and methods you will use to communicate or to manipulate the template in the template URL. You see there. All right, so and then the metadata is a list of information or properties that tells Angular where to get all these major building blocks that it needs to create and present this component to the view. Okay, and then the view, as you can see here, is referenced by this template URL, which is an external file in this case. And then together they describe the view, which is the actual DOM you see in the browser. And so let's head over to the IDE and explore the actual code of the Angular component and see in action. Okay, so here in the IDE, I'm going to go to the front end under the Angular Amine Stack Agency, and inside here in the SRC folder is where all the sources are. So when you run your code, everything, make sure you are in the actual application folder called Amine Stack Agency. So the easiest way is just click on it, right click on it, open a terminal, and it will navigate to that directory here. If it's not, you make sure you need to be in this directory all the time. All right, so here we have inside the SRC folder, we have the main TS and the index.html. Let's look at these two files first. The index.html, this is a single page application. It has a app-root directive or tag. This is an Angular tag. Anything that needs to be rendered throughout all your components should be put inside this in this file. These are like constant or data that usually don't change, right? Like any global style sheets or graphics or things like that. But this is the only file that it needs in terms of the view. And then the main TS, the main entry point, it loads a root module through this app module here, imported from the app folder, and then the name of that module. And then it bootstrap that module to the browser. Okay, so let's go and take a look inside the app folder here. We have all these files here. First, let's open the component. This is the component here. It has the word app.component.ts. Okay, so when you build more of your components, it's going to follow this standard convention. So the name of the component will be in the front, followed by the word component.ts. Right, so it's like about that component, user that component, and so forth. And it will follow the same convention. And so here we have the first line is an import statement that import all the Angular core, so we can use this component. So Angular will recognize that this is a component, Angular component. Okay, so the next block of code here is the decorator. This is the add component decorator. It must have this add symbol in front, followed by the word component here. And then inside this component, you see it's an object. Right? It's a object called it is a metadata. And within this metadata, you see that three very important properties here. The properties listed here are not important in the way they are ordered. It can come any order, doesn't matter, right? So the first one here is called the selector property, and it has a very unique property called or selector called app-root. Okay, this app-root is referring to this app-root tag here, right? So it's the tag that you will use on the view on the template on the template, so that it will render whatever this HTML file to that location. Okay, and then the next one down is the template URL. This is a indication that this template is an external template, external HTML file basically. And so it's inside the same directory, and it has the name of app.component.html, which is this file here. Right? If you open that file, this is the template, right? It's pretty huge. If you look at it, it's over like, almost 600 lines. That's huge. But anyways, so that is the file it's going to use to render. And then the next one now is the style URLs. And notice the word style URLs plural, whereas this is not. So because style sheets can be many, right? You can have a lot of style sheets. And if you have another one you want to use, you just put it right here. Just append it and then just add it to wherever it is, another CSS, whatever it is, you put it here. So you can have many, which is why it's a list. And then there are actually more properties, but we're not going to look at that right now. And so now, and then the next line below that is line 8, is the class definition, right? You export the class right away, and the name of the class is follow again the same convention, the name of your component, and follow the word component. It doesn't have to be called component. You can call whatever you want, but this is the convention, so I will just stick with this convention, okay? And then inside this class, you have nothing here but just a title, a property, has a title called main stack agency. So you can change this to whatever you want, just a title. And this is how a component is created. So you must have a class right below this directive. If you have two classes like this, right, whichever is used first will be used as the component for this one here. So ideally you should have only one class per component. Okay, and it must follow immediately below this directive. It cannot be above it either. Okay, so the order in there is important. Okay, so that is the component. And so let's run this first and see what it looks like. Go back into your terminal and just type in ngserve. And you can type the /o to open it, but I think my browser is already open. So I'm going to go to the browser and open that manually. Well, that's being rendered. Let's go to the browser. And it should be in the localhost. We did it before, right? Localhost 4200 as the port number. And once it's rendered, and there it is. So you can see that this is the view, the template. Now, if you look at this, if you do a source view, right click and source view, you'll see that there's nothing there, right? This is the exactly what we saw in the HTML document. This is app root. So this view here, this entire page is rendered to this tag. So you can't see here because it's only rendered in the DOM. So if you press F12 here, and if you look in the view in the element, you will see it that it's here, the app, and has a bunch of other attributes, DNG, something here. These are automatically created by Angular. And so you can see here now this app root contains the entire view document here. So here's the div tag, the image and the left logo here, and then we have the right logo, and then the main content here, and so on. That's how Angular works. Okay. So now let's go back and do one more thing. Let me close this now. In here, this is required, right? It's really important. And so the template URL here, you can use an external template like this. Ideally, you would do that because it's just more convenient. Also, the file can be it's easier to manage, right? And then the URL here, this is a CSS file. So if you open that CSS folder, you see there's nothing there. Okay, but in the app component HTML, you see all the CSS style rules starts from like 10 all the way down. It's pretty long. Let me just collapse this to like 299. And so you may wonder, why did Angular put it here? Well, I think just because it's just a starter file, so they want to make sure that all this style is applied to this app it's running, just in case that if the CSS did not work. So for us, we're gonna for now, I'm gonna copy all of these, cut everything here, and move it to the app component.css, right? So think of this as a CSS file. And as a rule, you don't have the style here. We move that. Also on the very beginning, we move the style tag. So there you go, just your regular CSS style sheet. And so you can save that, and then in the app component HTML, so you don't have to put that here. So you don't have to put a link here, href and so on. You don't have to do that because Angular does that automatically for you. And so that's why you have the component, right? It tells Angular that, okay, this CSS will be used or applied to this HTML. And of course, you just saw that in the HTML, you can create your own CSS in here too, which is fine. But that's not ideal, right? You put everything here, and this CSS is only local to this template here in this component. So if you have another component, this CSS will not apply to that component. If you want something to apply to all the components, again, put in the index file. So you can have your own global style sheet here that will apply to all your components, right? And so that's, we just did that. And as you can see, if I save it, go back to my browser, it should still work. And this will automatically render as you make changes to your code while the engine is running, right? So as you can see, everything looks fine. Now, one more thing here. In here, you can use inline template as well. So if you remove the word URL, and then instead of using the HTML template, I can put my template right in here. So let's just say h1, and then hello Angular. And you can see that I can put my usual inline tags here. I've removed the URL though, and I can keep the external URL for the CSS. It's fine. Save that. If I go to the browser, and you'll see that now the other template is gone because now we're using the inline template instead of the external template, right? So that's how it is. So you have those two options, in either the external or the inline. Same thing with the CSS. If I'm using the URLs, it's using the external. If you want to use an inline, just remove the URLs and keep the styles. And then here, each bracket and each element here is a CSS rule. So you can say h1, let's just say h1, I want that color to be, I want h1 to be red, right? Color, and then red, like that. And then the next one will be the next H element. So you can say h1, and then what did I call it? h1, I want border 1 px solid, and then green, something like that, right? So you have your inline style for both the style sheet and the template. So you can see you can style it just like that, right? So use that for like really short template for testing purposes, things like that. But usually you want to put into a external style sheet. So I'm just going to undo this and go back to where it was before. Okay. All right. So now let's go and create a really simple component. We'll create the about component and we'll modify that later. All right. So let's go to the terminal. And then I'll keep this running. Let's add another terminal over here, and then go into the front end, and then mean stack agency. Just let me show you in here. Okay, so to create component, you would use the ng CLI. So ng followed by the G for generate, or you can type the whole word generate if you want to. Okay, either way, I'll use the shortcut G. And then if you are going to create a component, you just put the letter C for component, or type the whole word component out. And then followed by the name of the component, and just call it about. Okay, and just hit enter. And it should create all the files you needed for this component. As you can see, created 4 files. Looks just exactly like the other one, the about component HTML, the spec for unit testing. This is the actual component, the source code, and then the CSS file. Right inside the app folder, there's about folder. So if you go to the app folder, you see there's about folder created automatically. And then inside here we have the CSS, which is empty. You have the about HTML, has just one very simple tag there. This is the component. Okay, looks exactly the same as before, followed by a prefix with the app dash about something something, right? And then the class name is also about, followed by the word component. And add a few things in here. This is called a hook. We'll talk about that later in the course. And so there's no data in here, except we just have one fixed data in the view here. And then if you look at the here, right, we export this class out called app component. Now if you open the module component here, the app module, you see that Angular automatically imported that in here. Imported here in line 6, and then also add it to the declarations property of the ng module, which we'll talk about much later, and here as the app about, right? In addition to the app component, which is the root component. But down here, you see that it's still going to be just one root component, and the root component is this one here. And so you can choose between which component should be the root, or you can decide on that. But for now, this is how it's all linked together, right? So once it's linked together to a module, then you can access it, you can use it. If you don't include it into a module, it won't work. So now you can't just go to the browser either and say, okay, well, it's about, so should I go to the /about page, right? Eventually, that's how it's going to be done. But for now, it doesn't work that way because we haven't learned about routing yet. But to see in action, think about the component here in the app, in the about component, right? It has a tag called app-about. So I want to render this to this tag. Where should I put it? I'm going to put it in the root component here. Okay. Let's say we're going to put it right below, maybe below the big logo or something. This is the title, the logo here. So right in here, I'm going to put here the app-about. And that's the tag that we just created in the about component. So it should be rendered here. Let's go and save it and go to the browser. And you see this right here, right? It renders automatically, and there it is, right below that. And you can use it anywhere in your code as many times as you want. So wherever you place a tag, it will be treated just like an HTML tag, like h1 or a paragraph tag, and we render right in this location. And so that's how component works in Angular.